Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Rife.
On today's episode, Katie and I are diving into award season, sharing our thoughts on two high-profile Netflix contenders, David Fincher's Mank and Ron Howard's Hillbilly Elegy. Then we'll shift gears to something a little more fun and a lot more disreputable, the Vince Vaughn horror comedy, Freaky.
Welcome to Film Club.
Okay, Katie, so it is, as of now, it is November 2020.
Believe it or not, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, time has no meaning anymore. Sometimes I feel like that this year just flew by faster than any I've ever lived, and then other times I feel like it's still March, and we've been living in endless March, and so time is in a very strange place right now.
Yeah.
So you and I have been doing Film Club together for about a year now.
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yeah, I think we relaunched last November, in fact. So we've been doing it for about a year.
For award season, right?
Yeah, for award season, exactly. And, you know, in a lot of respects, the world is a very different place than it was a year ago, both in terms of how we're living, all of us, or
right.
how we should be living anyway, and but also in terms of the movie industry. It's been a very strange year for movies. I think people are going to look back on this one, and it's going to really seem like an anomaly in the history of the medium.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like, you know, I mean, the last pandemic, 1918, the film industry did exist, but it certainly was not the same. You know, it wasn't whole states' economies weren't in peril if the Nickelodeons shut down. You know, it wasn't quite like that then.
Yeah. I remember we discussing when we first, when we did the first podcast episode, when we first went remote because of the pandemic, we basically discussed the fact that we've kind of, since the tradition of movies opening once a week in the United States has been a thing, we have never seen. Basically, we're living in unprecedented times in the idea that we could have gone as long as we did without movies hitting theaters. It's kind of never happened in Hollywood's history. So a different time in that respect. But in another respect, I don't think things are that radically different. And because it's November, award season is happening. You know? It kind of remains to be seen. I still think there's a very offhand chance that the Oscars get canceled this year.
Oh, you think?
It's possible. I think. I would say that shrinks kind of every day, and I think you can see that the studios and distributors they're all kind of playing the game now. Like, right. I don't know. I mean, who knows if theaters will be open? But at this point, the Academy has sort of set up a system where they've sort of bent the rules a little bit so that you no longer have to have a theatrical premiere or have to play in theaters first to be eligible for awards this year.
Right. Yeah. It used to be a week in New York or LA, which meant that if you lived in New York or LA, you could sometimes have the delightful opportunity to go see something completely random in an empty theater because the producers had a overly optimistic awards run in mind.
Well, and then something will happen like with Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which we included as one of last year's best films, even though it did exactly what you're talking about. It played in basically probably one or two theaters or something.
Yep, a qualifying run, A
qualifying run in December, and then it really didn't start hitting U.S. theaters until February.
Right, yeah. Which for the average person is probably better anyway because it's closer to the Oscars, and so it's more sort of in the front of mind around that time, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of the reasons that January is such a dumping grounds, I think, for Hollywood and has been for a pretty long time at this point, is that a lot of people end up spending January catching up with these with awards contenders, with movies that were big at the end of the year. January just kind of becomes an extension of November and December in a way.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like basically critics who are the only ones who have seen everything, that's going to be a contender by the middle of December. And that's just because, you have to file your coverage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So last year around this time, we, in one of the first episodes we talked about two Netflix films that were both vying for awards and both ended up doing pretty well for themselves. And that is The Irishman, Martin Scorsese's film, and Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story.
That's right. I remember this.
Yep. And those were kind of Netflix's big big movies in the game last year. And obviously neither of them went on to win Best Picture. That went to Parasite. But both did pretty well for themselves over award season. This year, Netflix has some other films in contention, and we're going to talk about two of those today. Two films that I think one of them probably has a pretty good chance of doing well with the Academy Awards, and the other one, I think, based on reception to it so far, I think it's quite as strong of a chance. But let's let's start with the one that I think in a lot of respects looks like at least looks like something that the Academy would go nuts for. And I don't think today we should talk a lot about these films' Oscar chances.
I was going to say the one thing that I think about this particular award season is that I think it will go forward just because in some ways the pandemic has just exacerbated existing trends towards streaming services and towards day and date releases. Those are things that were happening already, and the lack of big films in theaters is just kind of accelerating trends that were already in motion, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I mean, there has been kind of a movement towards streaming giants like Netflix being eligible, or I mean, not just eligible, being real contenders. I mean, I remember players in the game. Exactly. I mean, Roma 2 years ago, I remember. I actually still kind of can't believe any of us convinced ourselves that was going to win Best Picture, but it was at least in the running, and that felt like a bit of a sea change because that was the same year too. Yeah. And that was the same year, though, that Cannes made this big statement where they said that if you were a Netflix film, the only way that you could compete at Cannes was if you also agreed to show the film in French theaters. So there was that big war between Netflix and Cannes. But I do feel like at this point, you're right that the pandemic has sort of changed something that was it sort of just accelerated something that was already happening. Which is that the studios do not have a stranglehold on award season anymore.
Right, exactly. Like instead of viewing things like Netflix or Amazon Studios as these sort of interlopers who are interrupting the real work that the studios are doing, in a way, those things are kind of saviors of the film industry right now because they are still putting out high profile films where studios are not because they rely on theatrical.
Right. I mean, can you even imagine what the Academy Awards would look like this year if they did not allow the streaming giants to be a part of it, It'd be that joke people were making at the beginning of the year where it'd be like Birds of Prey for Best Picture, which I wouldn't have been mad about, but as long as it beat Sonic the Hedgehog. Well, so the first film we're going to talk about today is, I think, had it been released by, one could say, a traditional studio, if Paramount had funded this film, if Warner Brothers had made this film, I think it would be in the conversation. I think regardless of how good it is, I think that's mainly what we're going to talk about today. I think this is a movie that would appeal to a Hollywood that's interested in congratulating itself.
Oh, totally. That's one of Hollywood's favorite topics.
Loves
it. Gazing at their own navels is one of their favorite things to do. Yeah. And sometimes it turns out well. I'm a fan of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and sometimes, it's less so.
So the movie today is Mank, and that is the new film from David Fincher, and Fincher's first film, in fact, his first feature in 6 years. Actually, his last one was Gone Girl, and
he's been working on Mindhunter, so he's been otherwise occupied at Netflix. Actually,
yes, that's right. And Fincher is also one of those guys who will be attached to a project for a while and then kind of nothing will happen with it. He'll try to be getting money for it or something. I remember for a while he was talking about maybe doing the World War Z sequel, which I have to say I would love to see a zombie movie from David Fincher. I think that would be cool. It would be interesting.
It'd be like a cool clinical filmmaker making a very messy, visceral genre. Sign me up. That sounds interesting.
Totally. But this is kind of, in some respects, I think this movie is kind of a change of pace for him.
I would agree with that, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it much resembles anything he's made before it.
No.
It is, for starters, it is in some respects, a personal project for Fincher. It's the script for the film was written by his late father, Jack Fincher. years ago, in fact. So he has that kind of family connection to the film, to the point where I almost kind of wonder if his father hadn't been attached to this thing, if his father hadn't written the screenplay, if this is something that Fincher would even make, to be honest.
Yeah, or if he's really the right filmmaker for this material, because I'm not sure that he is.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of agree with you, to be honest. I mean, I think that Fincher allows himself to make it into a technical exercise in some ways, which is very, I think he does with a lot of his projects. I mean, I think one of the things.
Sure, yeah.
Fincher is sort of one of the prime examples today of that, of your ability, a filmmaker's ability to elevate material that might not always be totally up to snuff. You know, I think about something like his version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which that book is kind of airport fiction, let's be honest. And but Fincher kind of gives us the best possible version I could imagine of that particular story.
Yeah, totally.
And Mank, I think that he uses the film as an opportunity to play around with certain things. I mean, the film has a lot of sort of throwback flourishes to it. He shoots it in this kind of sumptuous black and white, although obviously digital, not celluloid. And it has these kind of throwback quirks, like imaginary reel changes and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I was going to say there are a couple of areas where you get the little dot in the upper right-hand corner of the frame, which is supposed to be the sign to change the reel.
Which is a total affectation, obviously, because he shot it on digital, you know? I mean, it's the type of thing that, like, Tarantino and Rodriguez were playing with when they did Grindhouse as well, you know?
Yep. Only, like, a much more elevated version of it. I felt like, so, like, in terms of matching the director with the material, I thought this was an interesting and not entirely successful tone for a Fincher, because, like, there were a lot of scenes in this. Like, there's scenes, you know, kind of meandering through the back lots and, you know, the old MGM and stuff like that. And that reminded me a lot of something that you would see in a Coen Brothers movie, specifically Hail Caesar. And I just felt like that the kind of like good humor and warmth that you see when someone like the Coens do something like that didn't really come through here that much.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I totally agree with the idea that there's a lot of warmth in the Coen Brothers films.
Well, it's good natured at least.
Yeah. Certainly there's a more maybe a more comic dimension to it.
Yes.
Certainly a film like Hail Caesar is obviously playing a lot of that backdrop for laughs in a way that Mank isn't, although Mank does have some funny dialogue, at least. Fincher's script has a lot of sort of witty bon mots being thrown around. Which is the film is it's sort of about the writing of Citizen Kane.
Basically.
Greatest film of all time. And the film, it sort of takes its inspiration, or at least it's kind of its philosophy about the creation of that film from this kind of infamous New Yorker article written by Pauline Kael called Raising Cain. And it kind of presented the idea that Citizen Kane was, that the true author of Citizen Kane was not Orson Welles, but it was the film's co-screenwriter, Herman J. Mankiewicz. And that take has been sort of widely discredited over the years. Like, people have basically said that that's basically a bunch of nonsense in terms of like its whole theory of him having the stronger influence over what we actually see on screen in Citizen Kane.
Right. Yeah. The film basically shows it where Mankiewicz delivers the script fully formed and Welles says, well, I'm going to put my name on it because I'm Orson Welles. That's basically how they frame it in this film.
Which I don't really think is how it happened. I mean, again, it's been pretty widely discredited, that idea. I mean, frankly, I could care less about historical accuracy if the material is interesting enough.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like, I don't care if this thing is a load of hooey if it's like a compelling load of hooey.
Exactly.
You know,
or even a funny one or an entertaining
right. Exactly.
one.
I think the issue is that a lot of it is actually is not compelling enough. I think that the film's I'm not sure I buy the film's dramatic angle. I mean, it's set in primarily in the spring of 1940. Mankiewicz at the time has been hired to write Citizen Kane, although he is not going to be taking credit for it. And he is sort of decamped to this ranch in California. where he's going to write the script. And the Mankiewicz, as we see him, everyone calls him Mank. He's played by Gary Oldman. Is this alcoholic. He's sort of this alcoholic man about town. He has this reputation for sort of causing trouble at public events and being very outspoken. And he's like a very much an old Hollywood character.
Right.
And the film kind of adopts this flashback structure, semi-reflective of the one used in Citizen Kane, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I thought that it's not precisely the same, but Citizen Kane is structured the same way, where you have, someone is writing a story and then people from the story keep coming in and out, and it keeps going back to different parts of this flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. And
flashback structure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that Fincher is borrowing a few things from Kane, without going quite full. This is not like a winky fan service, like.
Yeah, it's not Gus Van Sant's Psycho.
No, it's not that. It's not. There's not constant callbacks. I mean, there are moments. I mean, it's been a few years since I've seen Citizen Kane. I certainly caught that there's a shot where Oldman is laying in bed and drops a glass bottle on the ground that's shot exactly like a similar moment in Citizen Kane. And certain conversations feel kind of like echoes of ones in Citizen Kane. There's definitely some Kane in the film's DNA, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not, the whole thing is not like it's not constantly reiterating Citizen Kane. And I think that applies to it stylistically too. I think you could say that you could look what he's doing, and obviously he is pulling out some antiquated stylistic techniques, but I don't think the film is ever trying to look like a movie that was made in 1940, you know? No,
I don't think so. I think it's more of a wink and a nod than trying to literally recreate it.
Right, exactly. So the movie posits that Mankiewicz wrote Citizen Kane as a kind of revenge on the newspaper tycoon William Randall Hearst, who has long been, I mean, people have long known that he was the model for Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
You know? But the plot comes to involve a race for governor in California and Upton Sinclair's bid for office. And I just have to say that I didn't find. I'm totally fine with a film that is not that like broken down to its essence is not historically accurate. I don't really care too much about something being a direct reflection of the record. I just find that this whole notion that Mank was wrapped up in this kind of local California election, and that was sort of the spark that lit Citizen Kane. It's kind of a boring and unconvincing angle on the creation of this movie. I mean, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit too close to Kane's own political ambitions in Citizen Kane. I think it's a little obvious of a connection there. And I think that overall, I agree that a film doesn't have to be historically accurate to be compelling, but I found this film's sort of the way that it posited the character of Mank as like this, he's a drunk, but he tells it like it is, and deep down he's a good guy. Like there's a detail in there about how he saved an entire village in Germany from the Holocaust and never told anybody. You know, he and his brother are, his brother is a character in the film too. They're modest, they're intellectual, they're thoughtful, they're considerate. They're everything that everyone else in Hollywood is not, and everyone else in Hollywood is basically just like, you know, a shallow, craven liar. And these are like the only two good guys in Hollywood, which is honestly a very boring character. It's a very boring dynamic, I think.
I don't know if it's totally hagiographic. I mean, I think that the movie at least acknowledges that Mank, or their version of Mank that they're presenting anyway, is destructively alcoholic. You know,
sure,
they at least acknowledge that, but they are romanticizing him.
Yes,
they're sort of seeing him as the one voice of principle and reason in Hollywood, you know.
He's more a good guy with a fatal flaw than you know, a complex character, I would say.
It's interesting because I don't think the movie ever totally articulates his political ideology. I mean, we're meant to kind of eventually understand that. So I don't want to reveal too much about what happens in the film. there are some things that happen as a result of the election results that might serve as the key inspiration for why Mank decided to write Citizen Kane, at least in the film's that's the film's conception. But the movie keeps sort of his objection to, one of the elements of the film is that MGM is sort of getting directly involved at the behest of Hearst in this election that's happening. And I didn't entirely get the impression that, I just don't feel like the film necessarily articulated what Mank's actual philosophy or what his ideology and his principled stance was in this case. I mean, he seems sort of, it's easy to sort of adopt his objections to it, but he does not come across as a character who cares a whole lot about like Upton Sinclair's politics. You know what I mean? Right.
No, he's not really on either side of that debate really in the film. And I think that that's kind of part of a piece of the way that they kind of frame the character as not like everyone else in Hollywood, where everyone else is very involved in this partisan push and pull, but he's not really, he's maybe a little too smart for that. I don't know.
One gets the impression that Fincher's father was, had a bit of hero worship for this guy.
Oh, 100%. Yes, very much so. Like in all sorts of things, there's all sorts of little details in the film that really kind of point towards, like that Fincher's father does think that this was like, he was like the best, perhaps the best guy in a gang of crooks, but still the best person out. Like, little details like there's a lot of casual misogyny in this movie, which is not that Fincher is being misogynistic, but it's just sort of showed as like being in the background of the atmosphere of the time. For example, you'd have like a bunch of writers sitting in a conference room, and then there's a topless woman just sitting there, and a lot of hitting on waitresses and affairs and mistresses and that sort of thing. But Mank is the guy who actually goes places with his wife and loves his wife and has a good, not a good relationship, but a relationship with his wife. He respects her as a person. And I think that's just one of the many ways that this film sort of puts him apart from the rest of the players.
Yeah, I think that's true. I wish that the script indulged a few less biopic cliches, I have to say. Characters announcing themselves upon arrival. Oh, or someone saying, oh, look, it's so-and-so.
Yeah, that was one of my that was something that really turned me off about this movie. There's a sequence in the middle where there's a dinner party at Hearst's house, and they have a long conversation about Adolf Hitler. That is a lot of like, Hitler, who's that guy? What a joke. And you're clearly supposed to watch it, and it's supposed to be really striking, but instead it just comes across as really like it's a real sledgehammer to the skull, that scene, I felt. And then they do that sort of thing a lot throughout this film, and it's one of my most hated biopic cliches. It's when a character walks in the room and announces their full name and historical significance.
Yeah. The other thing is that I think that there are a lot of kind of this movie has some of those kind of done to death eureka creative scenes, where we're meant to see the direct connection between what's happening and what's being put in the work. I mean, historically, it's very hard to dramatize writing. I mean, it's not an interesting thing to watch on screen, somebody writing.
Sure. We've talked about that many times. Yeah.
So I think there it's shrewd, at least on the movie's part, to build the film around these flashbacks, so that instead of, because the scenes in the present day are just him at the ranch writing, and there's not a lot to stand on there in terms of what we're seeing cinematically. So it's smart of the film to jump back in time and show us Mank's sort of glamorous life bouncing around Hollywood.
And he's bedridden a lot of the time in the contemporary scenes where he's writing, so that makes it even less interesting. He can't like walk around the house dictating or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I liked this film when it's being kind of fast and funny. Honestly, in scenes
it's more jazzy kind of period attitude when it's reaching for comedic, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, when we're just kind of when it's sort of taking the one could say the spark of old Hollywood, at least old Hollywood dialogue, and putting it in the actors' mouths. I mean, some of it's I think is a little overwritten, but at the same time, it's fun to see some of these actors deliver those lines, and it's fun to see them play these larger than life Hollywood characters.
That was my favorite thing about the film, was the casting and the appearances of all the different kind of characters. Perhaps that's hypocritical because I just said I don't like it when they walk in the room and say, "Hello, I'm Greta Garbo," but like some of the casting was kind of fun, I thought.
I think some of it's quite sharp. I mean, I think Charles Dance as Hearst is good casting.
Yeah, totally.
I quite liked Gary Oldman in the part. Enough so that I wish the Academy maybe had just waited a few more years. I mean, obviously, it was sort of his time was his number had come up, and he was when he won a couple years ago for Darkest Hour. But I think this is a much better performance that actually draws a lot more on what Oldman can do as an actor. I do think he's quite good in the film.
I think he did. I thought he was good too, because you get the in my opinion, a good performance will kind of give you an impression of a person as like a real human being. And when the camera stops, they still kind of exist in the world as a distinct personality. And I got that out of the character of Mank from Gary Oldman's performance. So.
For sure. I mean, I honestly think he's one of the best things about the film. I just, I used to think that David Fincher, I used to have this opinion on David Fincher that I've now renounced. But it was that I felt that a lot of the time he was kind of squandering his talents on material that was a little too lowbrow or something, something like Panic Room or like his like the aforementioned Dragon Tattoo adaptation. I sort of remember thinking at the time, gosh, Fincher is obviously such a gifted filmmaker, and he's so good at what he does. Why does he pick projects like this? But the truth is that I don't know. As the years have gone by, I think of Fincher a lot more as somebody like Alfred Hitchcock, who is interested in films that are, in some respects, I think, sort of pure entertainments. I think he makes fabulous thrillers, and when he seems the least like the proper fit for a project, I think it's often when the movie is this kind of blatant prestige deal,
Right.
I would kind of put this in the same ballpark as like Benjamin Button, which I think is one of his least interesting films as well.
Yeah, I would too. And I think Fincher, because of his very fussy style, excels the most at procedurals, which is why I think Zodiac is his best movie and a fabulous film. I think Zodiac's a really good movie. I think he excels in that sort of procedural format, which maybe is something, I don't know, I'm spitballing here. Maybe that sort of rigid structure applied to a biopic, you just end up with cliches, maybe.
Maybe. It's interesting, though, because there's an investigative quality to Kane as well, to Citizen Kane. I mean, it's all about these newspaper men trying to piece together this story, and that's actually very Fincher in its own way. I mean, people often joke about his movies are all about, you got to go to the library and look at documents,
Hey, I've stated my love for the library scene on this podcast more than once.
So it's interesting that this film, I feel like, is actually, it's one of his, I think it's one of his least procedural, even as it's calling back to what I would have to imagine is a major influence on his career in terms of films about investigations and discovering the truth and going to the library. So flashbacks play a prominent role in the other Netflix, one might say, awards hopeful that is out this month. Hopeful might be generous. It might be optimistic when it comes to this film. But that movie is Hillbilly Elegy. Now, Hillbilly Elegy is the new Ron Howard film, and it is based on a bestseller on J.D. Vance's memoir about his childhood in Ohio and his sort of his family's struggles with addiction and his attempts to make something of himself from one might say modest means. And
and kind of his attempt to pull some strings together in ways that I think in the end are pretty disingenuous. I think the kind of parallels I think he takes what is a sad family story. Like, I really do think that it's unfortunate that JD Vance's grew up with a mom who had some problems that she wasn't getting taken care of. Like, that is an issue. However, blowing that up into, and therefore that means that Appalachia is rotting from the inside, is pretty disingenuous in my opinion.
Yeah, I've never read the book. It came out in 2016, and sort of right at the beginning of what was about to become the Trump era.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
he's a neocon, and he's a venture capitalist, and he's very much on the right wing end of things. JD Vance, yeah.
And the book, I think, became kind of a lightning rod for culture war around that time, and people using it as a lens through which to see the rise of Trump, and what can this book tell us about our new political normal, and about the way that this country underestimated those who voted for Trump. Yeah. In your review, Katie, which readers can find on avclub.com as well, you identified the source material as kind of a piece with these New York Times profiles of rural Trump voters.
Yeah, the thing about Hillbilly Elegy is that it is very much of a piece with those profiles that are like, somebody flies in. There was one this year where someone from, I think it was Harper's Bazaar, flew into Wisconsin for a week and walked around like they were doing an anthropological survey of Wisconsin. And It's just sort of, and Hillbilly Elegy is of a piece with that, except it is coming from someone who comes from that place. Mm-hmm. However, the thing about Hillbilly Elegy is if you're using it to try to understand Appalachia, you shouldn't, because most people in Appalachia really don't like that book, and they really don't like JD Vance, and they feel like he threw basically his own people under the bus to get a book deal. And honestly, like it plays like a bit of a grift what he's up to here, because it doesn't really have any kind of insight into it. The book and the movie both kind of touch on things that could be insightful, but then boils them down into this very easy to swallow centrist to right-leaning kind of attitude of like, yeah, well, but it's your own fault and you need to pull yourself up and overcome, and then everything will be fine. And it's just really not. And there have been several don't rely wholly on me. There's been several book length rebuttals to JD Vance that have come out from Appalachian authors since 2016. And so I'm pretty happy to put that whole line of reasoning to rest, because it's what is so what I find so distasteful about it is he's basically selling a narrative to outsiders to hear what they want to hear about what the problem is with those people.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So it sort of is confirming people's, what you're suggesting is that Hillbilly Elegy, at least on the page, is sort of confirming people's prejudices and stereotypes about Appalachia.
Yeah, in a way that's supposed to like be like compassionate and enlightening, but it's actually pretty specious in terms of what it's actually saying,
Yeah. I'll be honest, I didn't get a coherent sort of cultural perspective from the movie one way or the other.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like the line between, my mom's an addict, and because I kind of harped on this in the review, but it's called the book is subtitled A Memoir of a Family and a Culture in Crisis, mm-hmm. But he never really draws the line between the family and the culture in any sort of coherent way, except if you were already predisposed to think that this is a culture in crisis, and then of course it confirms your bias, right?
Well, sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
I felt that again, I have not read the book, so I cannot speak to the degree to which it's faithful to that or that it reflects Vance's own philosophies. Mm-hmm. Watching the movie, though, this to me felt like somebody tried to make a depoliticized version of a book that has been very politicized over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does do that. Yeah, That's interesting, yeah, because the book really is, or the book is very politicized, but the movie really, it even takes that element out of it, and then what are you left with, right?
Yeah. I mean,
like, to me, this movie played like one of the parody movies that Jenna would be in on 30 Rock. Like
the rural juror.
Yeah, it's the rural juror come to life.
Some of the performances certainly are in that range, I would say. I mean, I kind of I balk a little bit at people talking about performances being Oscar bait, or that somebody's fishing for an award, because we don't really know. We don't always really know what people's motivations are for taking a project. Right. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that if an actor makes a film, it's not necessarily because they're deliberately gunning for an Oscar so much as they might find something interesting in the project. Maybe they're trying to raise their own profile or get some acclaim or something, but
or a challenge or whatever, right?
Yeah, I will say that this film challenges that. It's tough to watch some of the performances in this and think that the actors are not in some way angling for an award or something.
Like, I appreciate your broad-mindedness on this, but like, when you see Amy Adams in this film, it's just like, oh, so you heard that if you make yourself ugly, you'll get an Oscar, huh?
Yeah,
like,
it's definitely
it's mean, but it's hard to draw another conclusion. It really is.
I mean, it's textbook deglamorizing for a role. Although I'll say that it's obviously not the first time that Amy Adams has played a character less glamorous than herself. You know,
sure.
Yeah, I thought Adams was not especially good in this role. I mean, we should say the film is about Vance. Basically, the film again is based on his memoir, and it presents him as a kind of young 20-something trying to get into Harvard Law School. It's Harvard Law School, is it not?
Yeah, he's at Harvard Law School, yeah.
He's at Harvard Law School.
He's trying to get a job. Yeah, he's at school and he's trying to get a job.
Right. And he's kind of grappling with his past. He has kind of left behind his life in small town Ohio, and left behind the troubles of his family. But he has to go home because his mother is overdosed, and he goes home, and that sort of that prompts a chronic case of the flashbacks. And,
okay.
He starts.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie, I mean, in the same way that Mank, I think, needs its flashbacks, this is a movie that very much needs its flashbacks because.
Oh, sure.
I mean, the contemporary version of JT is a total drip as we see him in this movie. I mean,
yeah, he is just the most generic lawyer you can think of.
Just a really bland presumed audience surrogate, you know?
Absolutely.
So the flashbacks are doing a lot of the lifting in that department, because in order to honestly to really even give a shit what's going on with this guy and and his feelings about his family, we kind of have to see all that stuff unfold. Although I have to say, it's not nice to pick on child actors, and I try not to do it because you know, they're kids; they're still learning the craft.
Kids.
The kid who plays young JT is not very good either, and that's a problem, I think.
Let's blame Ron Howard for that. You know,
yeah.
He's the director.
Yeah.
It's his responsibility ultimately. The performances.
So we see. Vance goes home to see his mother, who is overdosed, and the film becomes about his complicated relationship with her and with his family. And we get these flashbacks to him as a kid and him struggling with his mother and her sometimes erratic and abusive behavior, and also him kind of getting tough love lessons in how to be better from his grandmother, played by Glenn Close.
Yeah, Mama.
Yeah.
Who I think I was a little slightly more generous with Glenn Close than some reviewers were. I felt as though she did, you know, compared to the sort of emptiness of JD, I felt that she actually had something of a personality. But that being said, she is such a cartoon character wearing these gigantic T-shirts and those big glasses and the accent that she puts on and the whole deal. It's so cartoonish that it's really, there's no pathos to it at all. You know, it's very much a caricature. But, you know, I mean, she was distinctive, I suppose. So that's something.
I think it's a Saturday Night Live performance, honestly.
Yeah.
And I mean, Close is a good actor, always has been. And you can see her fighting to invest her scene, fighting to invest like this dopey monologue that she gives about there being good Terminators and bad Terminators.
No. Well, no, there's three kinds of Terminators: good Terminators, bad Terminators, and neutral.
See, I'm a pretty big of the Terminator films, and I'm having a hard time remembering any neutral Terminators in those films. Just the Terminators who are sitting on the side of the war with Skynet. They're like, I don't want to get involved.
Well, I feel like that right there gives you it's a really great example of the sort of connections and depth of thought that are put into Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that Howard is on autopilot in this film too. I mean, I think that in order for this to be anything, in order for this to overcome kind of its goofier elements and maybe some of the cultural baggage that sits on it, I think you needed a filmmaker who had a perspective on this material, and I just don't get the impression that he does. I mean, Howard is sort of the consummate nice guy of Hollywood. And I think he might be too wholesome for this material in some respects.
Well, there was one directorial element of this film that I enjoyed, and that all the scenes that are set in, kind of the family homestead, the back home in very rural Kentucky in the very beginning of the film, the way he films like the nature in the film is very, it is elegiac in a way, it has this longing to go back to the land in simpler times. And the way he filmed the nature was pretty cool, and that is pretty much the only credit I'll give him. The rest of it was very much autopilot and sort of screeching cartoons. It was just really nothing to hang on.
Yeah, I mean, even the scenes you're talking about felt to me, I mean, I agree that they're probably the most distinctive stylistic moments in the film. Mm-hmm. But to me, they felt like he was just ripping off like David Gordon Green or something. It's like in the absence.
I'm not going to defend him. I mean, shit.
It's like in the absence of a perspective on this material, he's just kind of looking at another filmmaker who has filmed sort of those parts of the country in an interesting or romantic way.
Yeah, well, he's from North Carolina, so when he films North Carolina, he knows what he's talking about.
Right, exactly.
David Gordon Green, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Howard has had kind of an interesting. I feel like his work in recent years has generally been actually a little bit more interesting, at least visually, than his work has been traditionally. There's this kind of expressive streak that's come out in some of his recent films. I thought, like, In the Heart of the Sea, the film he made a few years ago, was actually like one of his most like visually adventurous films. But there's like no trace of that in Hillbilly Elegy, which honestly, for a lot of the time, feels to me like it could have been directed by just about anyone.
Yeah, and that just adds to its sort of the quality that you're not watching a real film, that you're watching a parody of a film.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a perspective necessarily on the source material because I haven't read it, and I don't think the film really has much of a perspective on it either.
No, I think they might have been trying to tiptoe around sort of the more controversial political points made in the book, but I as I said a few minutes ago, I think that just makes it even, less of a statement. It makes it just further recede into the mush.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if race comes up in the book, but it is almost completely absent from the movie. We never learn.
Except for a couple lines that were just so infantilizing. Like there's one point where JD says something about Native Americans and Mama goes, "They're Indians, JD, like the Cleveland Indians." And like,
yeah,
like
she says, and they're
child.
not magic, they're just people,
Yeah.
Yeah,
like that's a toddler's understanding of that,
But that's like one of the only moments where, I mean, people have talked about Hillbilly Elegy as this sort of crucial text of the Trump era. And again, I don't know how much the book gets into it, but the media's occasional attempts to play keep away with the racism of certain parts of the country and to excuse it, as other things, as things like economic anxiety. This is a movie that just just doesn't even really acknowledge that that anyone might have those kind of perspectives on race, and it's like a non-issue in the film.
It doesn't want to engage with anything.
Right.
This movie just doesn't want to engage with anything. And it makes you wonder, like, why did they bother?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna make, I almost would have admired a conservative take on the film more, because at least that film would have a philosophy about what we're seeing.
Right. At least then you can say, well, I disagree, but I see what you're getting at. And here they're not really getting at anything.
At least I get why Howard was interested in making this film. I mean, because as a piece of storytelling, it's kind of thin and tedious, honestly. I mean, memoirs don't always make for great films. I think we've seen that a lot over the years, and I don't feel that this thing really totally finds a dramatic backbone. The ending is a total non-event in a lot of ways.
Yeah, just total, bunch of nothing.
Yeah.
I wanted to, like, empathize with the material and all this stuff, and like I said, every once in a while it hits on something real, but it just doesn't have a point. It doesn't have any real point of view to get any of that across, like, and it always undercuts itself with stupid bullshit. Like, okay, so there's one scene in the film where JD is at a dinner where he is meeting all these heads of these different law firms that he's trying to get an internship at. And, and they kind of patronize him a little bit when they ask where he's from, and he tells them, and they start asking about Hatfield and McCoy's and blah, blah, blah. And he feels very intimidated around all these rich people, which a lot of people can empathize with. A lot of people who grew up and left the place where they grew up and feel a little bit conflicted about it. Like, there's a lot of emotion for people. That's a real phenomenon, But then they immediately undercut it by having him call his girlfriend in a panic because they used 2 forks on the table. And it's like, we ain't got no 2 forks in Ohio. Like, it's a cartoon. I found this movie immensely frustrating.
I'm with you. I mean, it didn't bother me. I mean, I know you're from Ohio, and some of this was
I take it a little personally because
JD
Vance's hometown is not far from where I grew up, and we drove through there all the time on the way to my grandparents' house when I was growing up, and the thing is, I don't think she'd mind if I share this on the podcast. I called my mom and told her about this whole thing. I was like, you remember that book, Hillbilly Elegy? They made a movie of it and blah, blah, blah. And I said, did you know that movie is set in Middletown? And she goes, Middletown? That's not even the most hillbilly town in that county.
That's funny.
So, yeah. Don't know who this movie's for. I don't know who it's trying to speak for. I just don't know what the hell they were thinking.
You know what movie I thought of while watching this, though, actually, and a very different film, at least in terms of the culture that it's depicting, but was Honey Boy, the movie about Shia LaBeouf's film that he wrote anyway, about his childhood and his relationship with his dad, and that is a film that to me seems like much more honestly be grappling with a real person's relationship to their father, and it's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, but in that one, you can at least see somebody is trying to work out their feelings and maybe get beyond them, to get beyond how they feel about their parent. And in this one, I just felt like the movie does not seem willing to really investigate JD's feelings about his mother, maybe because he doesn't really do that in the book, or maybe because that would be too messy for something that I think wants to tie things up a little in a slightly more tidy fashion.
I think it's the second one. I think Vance is part of this. I think he kind of wants to tie it up in a tidy bow too, a situation that is not a tidy situation. And as we've reiterated several times over the past few minutes, you end up with something that is kind of neither here nor there.
Okay, so enough about these prestige projects, or at least these aspirationally prestige projects.
Right.
Let's talk about something that's a little bit more disreputable, something that you can, unfortunately, I think you can still only see right now in theaters, which we officially here at Film Club do not recommend, but should be available, I would say probably soon enough on VOD or digital platforms. And that is the horror comedy Freaky.
Yeah. It is very funny, like you said, Dowd. We're like, all right, I suppose we should cover the two big Netflix awards movies, but now a body swap horror movie that we actually both liked.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly say that Freaky is the best of these three films.
I would agree with that, yeah.
So it's the new movie from Christopher Landon, and Landon has sort of made a name for himself over the last few years, making horror comedies, and specifically making the Happy Death Day movies. And those films were basically took the premise of Groundhog Day and said, what if the Phil Collins character in Groundhog Day was the reason the day kept resetting is that he is constantly being killed by a slasher in a plastic Halloween mask, you know?
Right. Yeah, sort of the sort of abstract trope post-Scream version of the slasher, where it's very knowing about the tropes of horror.
Exactly. And the sequel brought in a little bit of Back to the Future 2. So it's very clear that that this guy sort of has a mode, or at least he's found his niche, which is he makes these horror films, these horror comedies that take sort of comedic premises and put a horror spin on them. And that's very much true of Freaky, which obviously the title is a twist on Freaky Friday, probably the most famous of the body swap comedies.
Yeah, sure.
And
I think so.
Yeah. Apparently, the original title of the film was supposed to be Freaky Friday the 13th, which I kind of like a little bit better, to be honest.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. Yeah. Just put a button on it so no one misses the reference, right?
Yeah, exactly. I actually watched the film I watched the film 2 days before Friday the 13th, so on Wednesday the 11th, and the movie opens with a big title card that says Wednesday the 11th, and I was like,
it's today! Yeah. It is always fun when that happens. I do love when that happens.
Yeah. So the premise of the film is that there basically is this killer. He's called the Blissfield Butcher. He's played by Vince Vaughn, and he's stalking this basically this like unidentified suburban town. I would say probably presumably in California. It really is not. There's no distinguishing features in this town at all.
Yeah, like it's sort of in the sort of Buffy mode where it's in California, but like where exactly is vague.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep. So he basically, this killer in the opening sequence of the film is a pretty fun. Basically a pretty fun homage to the Friday the 13th series. It's very much like a sort of condensed version of one of those movies, which, by the way, you can hear us talk about in an earlier episode. We talked about the whole series. True. So just going to plug that. But so Vaughn's character gets his hands on this mystical dagger. Sort of rather incidentally. So long story short, he ends up stabbing this high schooler, this high school student named Millie Kessler, played by Katherine Newton. And rather than dying, she wakes up the next morning to discover that she has swapped bodies with the killer. So in other words, Newton's character is now occupying Vaughn's body and vice versa. So the title obviously refers to Freaky Friday, as we mentioned before, but I think the premise actually more accurately resembles the 2002 Rob Schneider comedy, The Hot Chick. It's like, what if that movie had some gore in it?
Wow, I mean,
it's kind of the same deal, isn't it? I mean, the teenage girl is trapped. The comedic engine of the film is that a teenage girl is sort of trapped in the body of this lumbering man. He just happens to be a killer in this case.
I have not seen The Hot Chick.
Oh, you're missing out.
Apparently so. There is a gag like this in Jumanji, in the Jumanji movie that came out, I believe, December 2018.
Oh, you're right. But I will say this. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I really like about this movie is, honestly, is Vaughn. I think that Vince Vaughn is really quite funny and really quite sweet in this role. And one of the things I really liked is that he does not. So, I mean, obviously, when he's playing the killer, he basically is just a big silent Jason Voorhees type.
Right.
But once the swap happens and he basically is now playing Newton's character, he's playing this teenage girl.
Like a 17-year-old girl.
Exactly. Yeah. Vaughn does not do the thing that Jack Black kind of does in Jumanji. He he's not doing this kind of shrill caricature of a teenage girl. He's not doing this thing where he's he basically, he's not like doing this affected, like he's not creating this affected
going, oh my god,
right,
yeah, like that kind of voice.
Yeah, I mean, the comedy is not about him, about suddenly Vince Vaughn is incredibly feminine or something. It really does seem like Vaughn is in a non-hacky, non-stereotypical way, like a teenage girl has taken over Vaughn's body, and he manages to do it in a way that feels like respectful and sweet and funny. And I tweeted about this recently, that Vaughn for me is an example of somebody who I think we all have a tendency sometimes to hold an artist's political beliefs against them. But Vaughn is somebody who has in recent years, it's been kind of revealed that he's maybe a little bit more right-wing than a lot of Hollywood, and I am somehow managing to not hold that against him, because I actually have quite liked his work in recent years.
It's okay to have a problematic fave. I firmly believe that. You can say, yes, I know they're problematic, but I like them anyway. I think it's okay to have problematic faves.
I think he's a good actor, honestly, and I think that his post... I mean, he was a comedy superstar for a few years, but I now think that he's in this kind of, it's like he's sort of passed out of the phase where he was a big movie star, and now he's sort of a character actor. And I think S. Craig Zoller has done some really interesting things with him and his presence. And I never thought I would ever see Vince Vaughn as like a badass, but that is kind of
right.
He's managed to sort of successfully transform him into one, I think.
He can be scary. I've seen some stuff where I was like, oh my God, yeah, he's a scary guy. Yeah.
Totally. And I think he's really funny in this. What did you think of him in this?
Honestly, I loved him in this. I thought that both he and Catherine Newton did a good job of kind of like subtly changing the physicality of their characters and sort of bringing but not using that as the engine for the comedy like you were talking about. Like the joke wasn't Vince Vaughn mincing around like, oh my God, my hair. It wasn't like that. It was the joke of it seemed to like it was twofold. It was one, there's sort of like confusion about being trapped in the other's body, which pretty funny, especially when you have a gender swap in there too. Like I think I mentioned this in Possessor, but there's a moment in Possessor where she wakes up and she's like, "Whoa, a penis!" And I don't know. That seems realistic to me. I'd be like, "What?" And I thought they both I thought they both did a good job with that, of kind of taking the surprise element of like the contrasting physicalities of the two characters and using that as engine for laughs. Like for example, scenes where Vince Vaughn is chasing Millie, that's Catherine Newton's character's friends around, and they're like, oh my God, it's gonna kill us. He's like, wait, guys, I just want to talk to you. And they're using that for comedy. And Catherine Newton, she has a serial killer inside of her. And it's sort of like a Hello, Mary Lou prom night 2, where all of a sudden she turns into this like ultra sultry, like, dangerous stiletto woman, which is fun,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think the film is scary. I'll say that. But
it's definitely a horror comedy.
It is, for sure. Just like Happy Death Day, honestly. But I do think it's actually quite gory in spots. I was a little surprised by that. The Happy Death Day movies are PG-13. This one is very safely an R.
For sure.
Because there is some kind of gnarly gore. But it's kind of remarkable to me that it somehow manages to balance being like occasionally a kind of gory horror comedy and also being like pretty wholesome ultimately, it's kind of a sweet and not mean-spirited film in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's sort of something that you see in this director's work in general. There's something, maybe it's just like the style of comedy being, I'm not sure what it is, but there's something about the way that he uses the tropes that is just fun and goofy and sweet and not snarky.
Yeah.
Which is very appealing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see somebody dabble in slasher films, which I feel like so often are dependent on trying to make the audience dislike the characters so that we don't feel too bad about them getting brutally murdered.
Or you cheer for it, really.
Right, exactly. But in Freaky, I feel like there are characters. I will say this: the characters who do get it in this are very much. We're very much encouraged to dislike. The movie actually kind of bends over backwards to be like, yeah, these people are assholes. You know, you can feel good about it. Like a homophobic kid gets a fucking gets a hook through his eye and stuff. You know. Mm-hmm.
Well, and and we're talking about like the sweetness and the lack of stereotypes, but Millie does have a friend who is a very stereotypical, like screaming, effeminate, gay teenager.
For sure. I do. I think that that's very true. I do think that the movie has a large amount of affection for that character. I think one could say maybe
I don't
it's
think
well-meaning,
it's mean, but
right. Some of the stuff with some of the sort of the teen comedy in this that doesn't hit as hard for me. I will say it sort of feels a little bit like an adult trying to write dialogue for teenagers. You know, it'd be a little deadly. You know.
It's like from most of the teen horror movies I've seen, it's very, very difficult to do. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
When you said that, I thought about the new Craft movie and how they have a line in there that's like, "Let's go, witches," and I'm just like, okay.
Sometimes it feels like these movies have dialogue that would mortify their characters if they were real and actually saying it, you know?
Totally. Yeah. They're singing it because they got paid to say that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I do think it's a lot better directed than the Happy Death Day movies. I think he's getting a lot better, and it might just be that it's rated R and that he doesn't have to kind of cut around the violence as much in this one. But I do think that this is a lot stronger approximation of the style of a slasher movie than those films were. I just think it's a more accomplished piece of filmmaking in that respect.
Yeah, and I think the tone is very confident, which is part of why it comes across as just fun and silly instead of, maybe a little bit know-it-all. Like sometimes things that are really dependent on tropes, like for example, Ready Player One can be kind of grating in their sort of pop cultural knowledge. I say this being a critic for a pop cultural site, knowing that a lot of people would find, the way we talk perhaps a little know-it-all and annoying, but that tone can come across very badly sometimes on screen.
For sure. I do think this thing probably could have used a rewrite, to be honest. I don't think it's a great piece of screenwriting, but the cast I think is good enough, and really Newton and Vaughn are both so appealing in these parts, playing the body swap premise is irresistible enough, and I think that they handle it well enough that this thing mostly works.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this would make a really great double feature with a movie called Tragedy Girls that came out a couple years ago.
Oh, got it. Okay.
That's also a very sort of clever tongue-in-cheek take on slasher tropes through the lens of like high school horror.
Right on.
All right, that's all we've got for you this week. Thanks so much for tuning into Film Club. Hillbilly Elegy is out on Netflix on November 24th. Freaky is out on VOD on November 30th. And then Mank hits Netflix on December 4th. In the meantime, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Rife. It was produced and edited by Carl Blumberg. Our sound mixer and finishing editor is Seth Hafer, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. We're off next week because of the holiday, but we'll be back in December with a brand new episode. Thanks.
Bye.